Well, what have we learned? We've learned that these compounds are present. They're almost everywhere. They're in streams. They're in groundwater. They're present as complex mixtures, and so the work that's being done typically is done on a single kind of compound. But what's the impact of a complex mixture of these compounds? We've learned that they affect a wide range of human activities, and I should say agricultural activities as well, because the drugs we feed to our livestock and our poultry have similar impacts. Some of these compounds are mobile, they move through the system. Some of them are persistent, they don't die away very easily. And of course, they depend upon the media that's sampled. So we need to look at all the different media. So that's kind of the background story. What has happened over the last year and a half, 2 years since I talked to you? Well, there was a series of Associated Press news stories back in March that drove a lot of attention to this topic, and it was a good thing. It exposed a lot of states to how far behind the curve they were. I think Pennsylvania was able to address these questions that came in. Pennsylvania had a study ongoing, study in progress. They were looking into the matter. And so Pennsylvania wasn't caught flat-footed. But it did draw a lot of attention to the problem, and I think that was a good thing. It drew moderate attention in the local press. Here's the story from the Patriot News front page. If you scroll on down the page, it talks about Senator Fumo resigns. It took precedent over Senator Fumo resigns. Can you believe that? I can't believe it. It can't be a bigger story, but it was. Also in the Lancaster Intelligencer, the headline was, Witches Brew of Drugs Found in Local Waterways. So headlines like that, actually these are both pretty good articles. I appreciate the work that the journalists did on those. Most recently, there are new articles that are appearing. As a matter of fact, there's one last week that AP did a follow-up story to their initial work from back in March. And the follow-up story says there are over at least 250 million pounds of pharmaceuticals going in the waterway. And also at least 46 million people in the U.S. are exposed to these drugs. So we're getting a lot of press, and I think rightly so. And one of the things that's also developed was back in June, EPA put out a white paper on water quality criteria. And of course, we all learned about that because it was in the environmental synopsis, right? Yes, Craig Brooks had the story on it. Here it is, Craig. Thank you. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but basically, we don't have a way to judge whether these compounds are toxic to humans or not, or are injurious to humans or not. And then, perhaps the most critical thing of all, that in my view as an ecologist, is this long-term research on fish. I'm going to talk about that. This is a Canadian study. They have a series of lakes. I've never seen them, but apparently it's a series of lakes in Manitoba, Canada. And I picture these lakes as being, glacier lakes, and they're all perfectly round. There's one after another. And so they can do that. I don't know if the government owns these lakes or what, but anyway, they can do these control studies on the lakes. And so they set up a 7-year study, and they had a control lake, and they had an experimental treatment lake. And the lakes were similar. They had fathead minnows in both, and they dumped estrogen into one lake, but only at concentrations that were like 0.2 micrograms per liter, so very low concentrations, something that we might find environmentally in streams in Pennsylvania. And what did they find? In the control lake, the fish population was okay, but in the treatment lake, where they had dumped in the estradiol, this is the compound that's in birth control pills, the fish population crashed over a couple of years. The first thing that happened was that the fish developed a condition called intersex, where the male fish developed eggs in their testes, and then the fish population crashed. Implication being that this compound leads to the intersex condition, which leads to fish population problems. This is done by Karen Kidd and a few of her colleagues and some EPA folks from the U.S. as well. Here's the paper. It's a great paper. It's published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences Journal. It's a prestigious journal.
Wait, how long was the study?
It was a 7-year total study, Representative Hutchison. I'm not sure. I think the impacts occurred after only 2 years. The fish population crash occurred after only 2 years. But there were data collected before the treatment and data collected after the treatment and time to write it up. This is a significant event to me in the issue of emerging contaminants. Okay, what do we know about emerging contaminants in Pennsylvania? Well, we have a study going on, occurrence of pharmaceuticals and antibiotics in Pennsylvania waters. This is a collaborative work between Pennsylvania DEP, Ariane, Rhonda, Bob, thank you very much, and USGS. Our office at the USGS. USGS is providing primarily, among other things, the laboratory analysis of these compounds. I like to show this picture because it illustrates the work that we have been doing. We've been looking at streams in Pennsylvania, upstream and downstream from municipal wastewater treatment plants, upstream and downstream from agricultural operations. And this is one of the agricultural operations in Chester County. The reason I like to show this is because here's the creek. That line there represents the creek. If we go upstream, we can't see it, but guess whose farm is upstream? Representative Art Hershey from Chester County. His farm's upstream. We didn't find anything bad here. Don't worry about it. He's okay. But this was a good site to study because actually the day we were there, one of the days we were there sampling, we saw that manure had been spread on the field, and obviously that's going to be a source for these contaminants. Just an example. So from phase 1 of the study, we found very few detections upstream from wastewater treatment plants, but lots of detections downstream. Well, that gives you a clue right there about where these compounds are coming from, right? We found all these things were in very low concentrations, the kind of concentrations where you just don't know if they're causing a problem or not. We expanded the work to phase 2. Phase 1 was really just occurrence. What can we find? Can we find these things? Yes, the answer is yes. We expanded it to include the Pennsylvania Water Quality Network and only sites in the network that are close to drinking water intakes. And so that was a great addition. And then we added sediments in part 2, and we added hormones to the list, and we also added fish health work to give us a sulfite component. And for phase 2, we found low concentrations of antibiotics in several different streams. We found low concentrations of pharmaceuticals, including the ones that you see listed there, diphenylhydramine, cotinine, carbamazepine, and others. But this is really a short list of compounds, particularly pharmaceuticals. We're only analyzing about 15 compounds out of the hundreds of pharmaceutical compounds that are out there. So while this work is great, this work is just the tip of the iceberg in my view. And for the so what component, indeed, we have found intersex conditions in some Pennsylvania fish. Is it affecting the fish population? We don't know. Will it eventually affect the fish population? We don't know. But we're working with folks in the USGS office in West Virginia to come up with these answers, and we're still waiting for some of those results to come back. The intersex condition is where ova, in other words, eggs, develop in the sex tissues of a male fish. So here's a slide that shows, this is a microscopic type study. This is a normal testis. This is a testis showing intersex, and there's a developing oocyte or developing egg. Same thing there. It's a microscopic test. It's used as a marker for endocrine disruption, and it also indicates estrogenic compounds in the environment of this fish. So it's a good marker, and we're finding those in Pennsylvania fish.